Well, hello, folks. It's Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. I have a little breakdown here of the Old Testament and the New Testament. But if you have a pause on your machine, and I'm sure you do, you'll need to pause if you're going to take a pad or a pen and copy down some of this stuff or look at it. But anyway, we've been talking about studying the Bible for the last couple excerpts, and now we're going to look at this. Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. If you were to read them, they're to connect the story of Israel with the wilderness journey. Those are the ones. Genesis, remember, was new beginnings, was the beginnings, and then we got Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and they talk about after the people of Israel were gone out and they were being connected to the wilderness experience. And then in Deuteronomy, we have Joshua came on the scene. And the contrast of Joshua was that he was a great leader, but he carried on many campaigns against other people. But God was the one that gave him the wisdom and gave him, told him how to do what to do. And then, of course, we have then Joshua and Judges, the book of Joshua and Judges. And Joshua, you know, was started out in Deuteronomy, and then he wrote a book himself. And the accounts of the settlement in Canaan was the contrast between, remember, the campaigns that he had, and he took the land, and then he, over here in Judges, he was putting a judge over the people in the land of Canaan. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes, remember, about the time that Joshua took over. And the judges came on the scene. They had to have somebody to judge what everybody was doing in their own eye. So, and then, of course, right after Judges, we had this lady named Ruth came along. Now, the story of Ruth is one that you really need to sit right down and read. You can read it in a very, very few minutes, but it needs to be read in its entirety. You do not need to open to the middle, the end, or open up to this verse or that verse and point to it. You need to read the whole book in its entirety and see how these men left their country of Israel over there where they were, Judah, and they went over there to the Moabite country, and they married these Moabitess girls, and then they died. The Lord struck them dead for doing what they did, and one of the girls decided to follow her mother-in-law and come back over there and be the woman that she needed to be. And then, of course, after Ruth, we have Esther. And Esther, she was a heroine. Esther was a heroine. She was a queen of queens. By the way, her husband didn't know she was a Jewish girl, and so at first, and so she was a queen of queens, and she saved the total country of Israel by telling the king of a plot that was against him, and then a plot that came against, I'm telling you, probably you won't read in your whole life, and I don't care what book you pick up off the shelf anywhere, you will never read a story more full of drama and interest and everything else than in the book of Esther. And customs, you'll learn customs, and you'll learn about customs. You'll learn many, many things in the book of Esther if you read it. You read it and you look for the what, the where, the why, the when, and the how. You look for that. What, where, why, when, who, and how. And that you'll find, man, that you are reading something really good. Samuel and Kings connected the story of Israel and their monarchy. Israel was a city of monarchy. It had one head, like for instance, England has a queen, and some other countries have monarchies. The related history of following the return, Ezra and Nehemiah, to, my goodness, I was just telling you about reading Ruth. Oh my goodness, read Ezra. Ezra went over there with an army. He had 18,000 men. He had the wealth of a kingdom with him. And he was going over there to build the temple. And he failed. He had all of the things of the world. And he failed. Here's a man who was going to build the temple. I wonder maybe if he wasn't in touch with God the way he should have been, or something happened that gave him problems in building the temple. Even though he was one of God's great giants in the Bible, he had some problems. And then, of course, came along Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a contemporary to Ezra. Those two were like twin brothers in a sense. But when Nehemiah went over there, Nehemiah went over under certain auspices. He did have an army in a sense, but it didn't record the army that he had. What it recorded, that he fasted for days. And when he got over there, he didn't tell anybody what he was going to do. And he fasted and he prayed and he asked God and he went out and he sought the face of the Lord. And God honored him. And he got done what he was supposed to. And then, of course, we got Psalms and we got Proverbs. And Psalms and Proverbs are the poetry. They are poetry. And they are ecclesiastical proverbs. Ecclesiastical proverbs, that means that they are human proverbs for the human flesh, for the body, and for the spiritual soul. But mostly for the body, like children, obey your parents in the Lord. Now that's for the body. And then there is a spiritual connotation to that. And your days shall be many on the earth. And I can understand ecclesiastically how that's said. You give a child that just got graduated, she's 17 or he's 17, and you give him a Mustang, and you say, now obey the law. Obey the law. But they don't listen to you, and they don't obey the law, and they go around the curve 80 miles an hour, and the sign says 35, and they run into a telephone pole and get killed, and they didn't obey their parents, and they cut their days short. And so there's two ways of looking at those days being many. And sometimes there is a place in the Bible that says days will be added unto you. Now that's a different story. It says, for the proverbial of wisdom. Proverbs is a book of wisdom. Now, the only wisdom that really counts is the wisdom of Jesus Christ. And the only proverb that really gives you the 100% wisdom of Jesus Christ is called wisdom, from 22 on in the book, in chapter 8 of Proverbs. Now we have Isaiah and Micah. And they were contemporary prophets. These guys were both prophets, and they were contemporaries of each other. And they were in Judah, and that's where they were the prophets, in Judah. And then, of course, Jeremiah and Ezekiel were the prophets of exile. Now, Jeremiah was a man that was laughed at, and stuff was thrown at him, and he was spurned, and he had a tough message. He had a tough message. I mean, it was tough. And they didn't want to hear it. And they didn't believe it. But I'll tell you what, every single word he said came true. Whether they believed it or not, it came true. You could believe the moon is made out of green cheese, but it ain't. And it won't never come true. But those things will come true that are true. Hosea and Amos, contemporary prophets again. Two more contemporaries, Hosea and Amos. And by the way, these little fellas, you look them up in your who's who. I got my little who's who right here somewhere. And you look them up in who's who in the Bible, and you'll find out that these guys, some of them, they're just like you and me. They came from nowhere. Get you one of these out, but $5, $6, $7. It's who's who in the Bible. If I put it this way, you can read it. It's who's who in the Bible, and that's got that particular one has, I think, the men and the women, but I've got one that's got just men and one that's got just women. But anyway, come back to find out that God took little bitty fellas that didn't amount to nothing and put them to work. And that's you and I. We're little bitty fellas, most of us, and we don't amount to nothing. But when God gets a hold of us, we can be a place of growth and prosperity in this century. And we can be like Hosea and Amos in that century. We can be in this century. Joel and Zechariah. Let's look at these. Joel and Zephaniah, Joel and Zephaniah. These were two prophets of the day of the Lord. They if you'll study them, they're going to talk about the day of the Lord. They're going to talk about the prophecy of the day of the Lord coming. And they're quoted all over the Bible. You will go back to these books. When you start really studying the Bible, you're going to be sent back by your helps and your helpmates and your things that are in the side or in your center reference. If you do not know how to study the Bible, you need to take the front cover. You need to learn, read it, what it says. Get a Bible with a center reference, or a Bible like I have right here. This has 900,000 references in it. This is a dake. It's worth the $87 I bought it for wholesale. So we had Haggai now and Zechariah. Remember, we had Joel and Zephaniah and Jeremiah and Habakkuk, and now we have Haggai. And by the way, Habakkuk and them were in the 7th century. They were in the 7th century of the world, and the world faced doubts again, like it did back in the flood of Noah. And then you got Haggai and Zechariah, and they were prophets to rebuild the temple again. Remember now, Ezra built the temple over here, and here we are, some guys building the temple again. The temple had to be rebuilt, built and rebuilt, built and rebuilt. Constantine, everybody that came along wanted to destroy the temple, and did. And what's amazing in that day is they didn't have what we have to fight with, yet they could knock down great buildings built with great big rocks, and they could knock them down. Then we got Matthew, Mark, Luke. And these are called the Synoptic Gospels. They are similar. But these stories in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, some of them, I had a man tell me, he said, I wouldn't believe the Bible. It can't be true because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John couldn't agree with each other. Well, let me tell you a little story. If you're standing over here looking at a car wreck, and you're standing over here looking at a car wreck, both of you are going to see the same car wreck, and you're going to tell a different story about it. It's the same car wreck, and the story looks different from two different angles. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are in a world living in two different angles, and they're standing, one maybe a mile down the beach there, and one a mile up the beach over here, and Jesus is standing on the boat. They're seeing two different whole things, and they may hear a little bit different or see a little different. Okay, Matthew and Luke, a similarity teaching material. Matthew and John for the two argumentative styles, and the Gospel of John and Ephesians and John are similar in the figure, the like figure. They're the same. But Acts is in Pauline. Paul epistle, 13 of Paul epistles, 13 Paul wrote 24% of the New Testament. 24% of the New Testament. I think Job wrote 24% of the Old Testament. But anyway, 24% of the New Testament was written by Paul. And these are called the Pauline epistles. And there was Romans and Galatians. And they treated they were talked about the law not being enforced anymore, but grace and faith and those things were coming into position. Now Ephesians and Colossians, they're similar too, but they're about the headship of Christ. The headship of Christ. There's nothing more important than the head. The head is most important. You cut the head off and you kill the body. And so the head is the most important thing, and Christ is the head. And 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Paul had to talk to them because they misunderstood some things. And because they misunderstood some things, Paul had to clarify some things. And then we got Timothy and Titus, and they were similar together. They were two boys that Paul the Apostle won to the Lord, and then he used them for workers, and then he used them for preachers, and then they wrote a book. And they were very, very astute young men. And 1 Timothy, 3:15 says, study to show thyself approved, a workman, need not to be ashamed, but rightly dividing the truth of God. Rightly dividing the Word of God. And that's what we need to do. Philippians and 2 Timothy now, contrasting pictures of Paul's prison years as a prisoner. And they tell the story of how Paul was in prison, how Paul and Silas hanging in the chains. And they decided to sing at 12 midnight, and the Lord put them out. And then Of course, you got Philippines. Now you remember the place of Philippi where Paul went and started that church over there. I must go. My time has come and gone. And then we've got Hebrews and Peter and Jude and then the book of Revelations. And my time has come and gone. I will see you next time. Thank you for tuning in to this Tidbits from the Word. Brother Peter.